All right. So Genesis chapter 8. So Genesis chapter 8 is really it's really pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot. There's not anything earth-shattering in there, but we're going to walk through it and talk through it a little bit. I just want to go back and I know you're getting tired of hearing me say some of the things that I'm saying because I say it week after week after week after week. But I guess it's just something that I kind of never really picked up on before until I studied Genesis this time. But anyhow, let me start with, I want to start with a verse where Genesis chapter 8 is where we're going to be, but I want to start with a little passage in 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 5 through 7. He says, "For this they willfully forget, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth was standing out of the water and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. But the heavens and the earth, which are now preserved by the same word, are reserved for fire until the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men." So one of the things that you keep hearing me say over and over and over and over again, and it's here in chapter 8 again. And again, one of the things that in all my years of studying, I've never really picked up on until studying it this time. Creation changed at the flood. The world changed at the flood. And we talked about this last week. We went over it last week where it talks about the waters from the deep came up and the waters from above, the windows of heaven opened. And we went back and we read Genesis chapter 1. I think it was verse 2, verse 9, something like that. Verse 2 and 9 or 2 and 7, something like that. Or in the creation, it talks about that there was a firmament above, there was waters above, there was waters beneath, and there was firmament in the middle, and that all of creation was surrounded by waters. And I've been talking all of this time about how in the beginning, when it was created, these waters, canopies, basically we had like a greenhouse effect going on the earth. And Genesis chapter 1 or chapter 2 talked about how everything was watered with a mist. There wasn't really weather, there wasn't storms, because you had like a greenhouse. You didn't have to. It was perfect. It was perfect weather, perfect ecologically. We talked when we did in the creation of Genesis 1, and again, Genesis 1, 2, 3, sometimes I can't remember exactly what, but it indicates that all of the waters were together and that all of the land was together. It was all the waters were in one place, all the land was in one place. And so, but then you have this flood, and again, as I pointed out last week, what it says in chapter 7, this wasn't just it rained for 40 days and 40 nights and we had a flood. This was an incredible cataclysmic event that took place where the waters that were beneath, the waters called from the deep, they burst forward, and the waters that were above, it said the windows of heaven were open, so those waters that were above. So you had just this incredible cataclysmic surge and covering of everything with water. And everything changed after that. Everything ecologically changed. Obviously, we're not living in a greenhouse anymore. And we're not living in anything that has like a greenhouse effect. And we have weather now, and we have extreme weathers. We have extreme colds. We have and now all the land isn't together and all the water isn't together. And in fact, probably, and I'll mention this, well, I guess I'll mention it right now, even if I mention it again in a minute. There's probably more water on the earth now than there was at that time, just because the windows of heaven were open, all those waters came out, the fountains of the deep burst forth, and all those waters came up. And so as things changed, as the mountains changed, and all the waters began to settle into the lower spots, we probably have more water now than was at the beginning. Anyhow, I went off on a little tangent there, didn't I? But anyhow, that passage in 2 Peter that I read in chapter 3, verses 5 through 7, it says that. In verse 5, it says that they forget that by the word of God the heavens were of old, that the earth was standing out of water and in the water. That the earth was, again, there was water above it. The creation was in water. And then it says in verse 6 that the world which then existed perished, being flooded with water. And again, we're going to see this in chapter 8. God says this, that creation at that time was destroyed. Now it wasn't annihilated. Obviously, it was still there, but it was changed. That the world that then was perished. And he says in verse 7, but the heavens and the earth, which are now preserved by the same word, are reserved for fire until the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. So then he says that this world that we're in now, the one that the post-flood world, it's being preserved. Its destruction will be by fire. And it's being preserved until that time. Anyhow, so chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. Then God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth. And the waters subsided. And the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped. And the rain from heaven was restrained. So just a couple of things here. First of all, it says that God remembered Noah and every living thing. So obviously God had never forgotten Noah, right? I mean, God didn't forget that Noah was in the ark and that everything was in the ark. The idea behind that little phrase, God remembered Noah, is that God now turned his attention towards Noah and everything that was in the ark, and he began to act on their behalf. So while they were in the ark, they were being saved from judgment. God was judging the world, judging the people. But now at this time, God began to turn his attention toward Noah, toward the people. And actually it says every living thing and all the animals that were in the ark. So now he begins to turn his attention to those that he saved, everything that he saved, and all of those that he saved that were in the ark. And he began to act on their behalf. In fact, if, like I say, if what I say is true, and I think if you study it, you'll see that it certainly is, they're going to start a new life. I mean, it's going to be different. It's not going to be the world that they knew before. So they're beginning this new life. So he begins to turn his attention to them so that he can prepare them and lead them on this new life. So then it says he made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters begin to subside. So, and actually the word here, we know, don't think of like this was just a gentle little breeze blowing, all right? This was a massive wind that was blowing. It's a great wind, is really, and it had to be to start providing evaporation for all that water. It had to be a huge, great wind to start moving all those waters down to their low points and to start drying out the land. I mean, this wasn't just like a little gentle breeze. Now, this is very unusual because if you remember what I just said, that before this, because the earth was in like a greenhouse effect, there were no extreme temperatures. There were no storms. There were no strong winds. So this is something that's going to be very new. Weather is going to be a new part to the earth after Noah that was not before. Now there'll be extreme cold, there'll be extreme heat, there'll be winds, there'll be storms, there'll be rainstorms. And think about this. I don't even know how I thought about this. But they're going to, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I wanted to say it later or not. If I want to say it later, I'll say it again later. But just think about how when they get off the ark, all right, let's say 30 days later, they get a little rain. Huh? I mean, you might kind of freak out a little bit. PTSD. Yeah, it's a little PTSD. You might be like, I better get back in that ark, I mean, seriously, think about that. They had never experienced it before, and now suddenly they experience this great cataclysmic flood, which they're saved from, but then they get off the ark, and first time it rains, I bet they had a little apprehension. I'm just throwing that out there. So a great wind came. Verse 2, again, he closed up the fountains of the deep, and he closed up the windows of heaven, and also the rain was then stopped. So the three things that happened to really begin the process of settling this down is the great wind, closing up the fountains of the deep and closing up the windows of heaven and stopping the rain. So now, this next little thing I want to look at, and you're going to have to really follow me here. And if you don't get it, you can say, if you don't get it but you want to get it, just say, I don't get it. If you just think I'm a kook, then just let it go. All right? No. But it's interesting. And actually, I'm just going to throw something out that I think is interesting. Well, you'll see what I'm saying. Verses 3 and 4. So the waters receded continually from the earth, and at the end of 150 days, the waters decreased. The ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. And actually, I'm not there yet where you might think I'm a kook. But so the waters began to recede. They went down 150 days. And the ark rested in an area called Ararat. Ararat, now it doesn't say on the Mount of Ararat. It says in the mountains of Ararat. In other words, it rested in the mountains in the area that they knew as Ararat, which would be somewhere in Turkey, Iran, I think. Kind of what they called Ararat kind of covers some of both of those areas, Turkey and Iran. Now, however, what we call Mount Ararat is in Turkey, and it is the tallest mountain in that area. And so, speculation would be that likely what we call Mount Ararat is likely where it did rest. I know there's a lot of, and I looked for some of those little videos I wanted to show one tonight, about. There's been a lot of speculation and thoughts and documentaries about people thinking they found the ark on Ararat. I didn't see anything that just really struck me. I think it could very well be there, and I think it could very well, some of the things they've seen or found could very well be it. I don't really know, but I don't see why it couldn't be. So I do think it's probably there on what we call Mount Ararat. So I'm just going to point out that you notice it says it on the ark rested on the 7th month of the 17th day. They're very particular when they're writing this. He's very particular to make sure that there's a very specific timeline. And I guess I'll just go ahead and say it. They're actually in the ark for over a year. So, I don't know if you realize that or not. But it's not like it started raining, they got in the ark, they were there for 40 days and 40 nights, and the ark opened, and they got out. They were there for over a year. They were in that ark for over 1 year. So the waters decreased, verse 5, the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. You know what? Can I back up? Because where I'm going to go kooky on you, I've already passed it. I was talking about it, and then I went away from it. So anyhow, it's going back to that. It's going back to that wind. All right, that wind that's blowing on the world. That's in verse 3. Actually, it's not in verse 3, is it?
First hurricane.
Pardon?
First hurricane.
The first hurricane. First hurricane. It's in verse 1 where God made the wind to pass over the earth. So now, first of all, let me just say this. I think this was just an actual wind. And I think that what he's talking about here is an actual wind. All right. And I told you, I think it's a great wind. It was a strong wind. It was needed to provide evaporation. It was needed to push the waters to wherever they needed to go. But this is something that I found was kind of interesting. In the beginning, let me do this. So the word there that's translated wind is a word, and I probably couldn't pronounce it. Ruach. Okay, I was going to say that. But I didn't want to mispronounce it with you sitting there. No, Ruach. Now it can mean wind, but it can also be translated spirit. All right. So it's one of those. So if you go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, where it says the earth was without form, it was void. It says, and darkness was on the face of the deep. So again, this was all, it was like water. It was like water. The darkness, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now this is Genesis 1:2. This is the original creation. It was waters. And it says that the Spirit of God was there hovering over the waters, the Spirit of God. And so now here we have this wind, which could also be spirit, and we have the creation covered with water, and this wind, this spirit blowing over the waters. So I just thought it was interesting that it's almost like, it's not a recreation, so don't misunderstand me. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying God started all over, but I am saying it is very different. It is very different from the first creation. And so, I just thought it was interesting that the Spirit was there hovering over the waters at the original creation, and now the wind is here blowing over the waters before this second part of the creation. What did verse 9? What does 1 verse 9 say? Well, chapter 1 verse 9, God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. Yeah. Anyhow. All right, back over to chapter 8. Where was that? Verse 6. So it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. He sent out a raven which kept going to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. So this raven, a raven is just kind of, what were you going to say? It's a crow, yeah. And it's a scavenger. It's not the cleanest animal in the world. But so, he lets this raven go. And he talks about him flying to and fro. I think he probably just, flew around the ark a little bit. And he was just trying to see, if there was anything out there. So then in verse 8, so then he sends out a dove. Now this is a much more delicate, clean kind of bird. At least we think of them in that way, right? So he's going to send out a dove to see if the waters had receded from the face of the ground. And verse 9 says, but the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot. So she returned into the ark to him, and the waters were on the face of the whole earth. So he put his hand, he took her, and he drew her back into the ark. So he sent the dove out, and she couldn't find anywhere to land, anywhere to sit down. So she came back in to the ark. And so then he waited another 7 days, verse 10, and he sent the dove out from the ark again. And so then the dove came to him in the evening, and behold, a freshly plucked olive leaf was in her mouth, and Noah knew that the waters had receded from the earth. So she comes back, and she's got an olive branch in her mouth, and so he knew that there was at least the waters had gone down enough. And I guess either this was just like an olive branch that had just floated around through the storm, and she picked it up and brought it back, or something had sprouted and started growing already. One of those two things. But so she brought it back, so Noah knew that the waters had receded from the earth. So then he waited another 7 days, and he sent out the dove, which did not return to him anymore. So he knew then that it was. I do want to just throw this out there. So when they get off the ark, I want you to just think about this. They're not getting off the ark and stepping into the Garden of Eden. You understand what I'm saying? They are getting off the ark and stepping into a world that has been completely destroyed. You understand?
Where did they live?
Probably in the ark. No, they might have for a little while. I don't know, but I'm just saying. There weren't giant oak trees, and when they got off the ark, they stepped onto a world that was desolate because it had just been destroyed by a flood. These are just weird things that I've thought about that we don't always think about. So verse 13. And it came to pass in the 600th and first year, in the first month, the first day of the month, that the waters were dried up from the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark, and he looked, and indeed the surface of the ground was dry. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. So again, the very specific timeline, and you can go back and go through it all if you want to. But I think it's 377 days, so a little over a year, 370 something days. So it was a little over a year that they were in that ark. I know it was big. That's a long time. It's a long time. Anything before I get to the end? I told you there's nothing just real earth-shattering here in chapter 8, but
Is there any significance to the raven first and then the dove later? I mean, is that?
yeah, no, I just, like I said, just because I just think a raven is just, they're just kind of scavengers, and they'll just eat anything, and they'll just go anywhere, and I don't know. I think it was more when he really thought maybe there was hope for finding something that he sent the dove out. I don't know if there's any significance to it. There could be some significance to him coming back with an olive branch in his mouth. I mean, a dove with an olive branch in his mouth, that's like the international symbol for peace, right? You know? I mean, so, and I'm sure it came from this right here. That's certainly symbolic. Maybe the raven came back with a little carcass hanging out. Yeah. So verse 15, then God spoke to Noah, saying, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth. Be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife, and his wife and his sons, and his wives with him. And every animal, every creeping thing, and every bird, and whatever creeps on the earth, according to their families, they went out of the ark. So God called them out of the ark, and they came on out of the ark. So verse 20, then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and he took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and he offered burnt offerings on the altar. So again, I pointed this out a couple of times last week and the week before, that the specific instructions were to take 2 of every animal, but of the clean animals, he took 7, not just 2. And these were the clean animals. And the reason he took 7 seems like a weird number, but we see here because when he gets off, he sacrifices one. One of all the clean animals, he sacrifices as a sacrifice and as an offering to the Lord. And because they are the clean animals, and when I say clean, I'm going to think more along the lines of, I'm going to call them domesticated. I'm going to call them animals, yes, used for worship, but also animals that could be used as help, as being helpful. You know, some sheep, to get some wool, some of those kind of animals brought. So they had 3 pairs of those instead of 1 pair. They could reproduce a little bit faster. They could kind of get it going a little bit faster because they'd be animals that they would be needed and they would be useful in life. So he offered burnt offerings on the altar. So this was something else that, again, I just wanted to point out. So, we're only in Genesis chapter 8. We've had Adam, Cain, Abel, Seth, then the descendants of Seth down to Noah is obviously the last one we got, and all the others are gone by now. But, we've not had any law. There's not been any Moses. There's not been any Abraham. How did he know to make an altar and to sacrifice to God on an altar? And then we go all the way back to Cain and Abel, and we see that Cain and Abel, you remember, they brought offerings to the Lord. And so I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, it has always been known to worship God. And it has always been known to bring an offering to the Lord. And actually, it has always been known to sacrifice to the Lord. because Noah knew to do it. Noah knew to build an altar, and to take those offerings and to sacrifice them. Somehow, some way, they always knew that sacrifice was a critical and key element to approaching God. And obviously, we understand that to a greater extent now. It's not the sacrifice, though, that we offer so much as it is the sacrifice that God himself offered on our behalf. In verse 21, it says, "The Lord smelled a soothing aroma, and the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done." So I like that little phrase, and you can put it look it up in your Bible app or whatever, about things being a sweet smelling savor to the Lord. It's the idea of it being acceptable to him. And if you go into the Old Testament, you've got right in front of the Holy of Holies, which is the Holy of Holies is basically where the presence of God was, and right in front of it is the altar of incense, and it's where they burned the incense, and it went up as a sweet smelling aroma and a sweet smelling savor. So here he offers this, and it's just God's way of saying, I think, that I accept the sacrifice. It's God's way of accepting the sacrifice that Noah has offered there. And that's what he's saying. It was a sweet smelling aroma. He took notice of it. He took notice of the sacrifice that Noah had made. Noah was obviously grateful and thankful that God had rescued them. And he also would understand God's power. Well, I was going to say they would understand God's power like no one else on earth, but that's because there is no one else on earth. But because they saw the incredible, mighty power of God. And so they would have an understanding of that awesomeness and of that might. And so he was grateful, and so he worships. And so then God says, he says, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Even though the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, I will never again, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. He begins to make this covenant, and he's going to expand on it in chapter 9 a little bit. But he begins to make this covenant. He says, I'm not ever going to do that again. I'm not ever going to destroy all of mankind. I'm not ever going to curse the ground. I'm not ever going to destroy the earth because of mankind's actions. So, because what happens next time is it's going to be completely destroyed, and it's going to, all things are truly going to be made new the next time. Thus, that passage we read in 2 Peter 3, where he says that the world now is being reserved for fire. It's being saved for that complete and total annihilation and destruction. So it says, while the earth remains, verse 22, while the earth remains, seedtime and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. So again, this is another little verse that I use to just say that things are changed. He says, while the earth remains. And so in other words, he says, from now on. And it's like he says there's going to be seasons. There's going to be seed time and harvest. There's going to be cold and heat. There's going to be winter and summer. There's going to be day and night. Of course, there's always been day and night. And it shall not cease. But he's just saying that the cycle is going to go. The cycle is going to continue. It's going to go on and on and on and on forever. Chapter 8. Any questions? Any insights? Anything I missed? Didn't miss? Yeah.
And how they come out of the ark, and I just...
Yeah. So, I thought of that too, because, when we talked about them coming together, we said it's no problem, because I've said that before the flood, all of land was connected. So, and also during that time, because there weren't the extreme differences in weather. They could all live anywhere. So it was real easy for two of them to come and be there. And so now, but now you're like, land isn't connected anymore. But you know, like horses, we know that they're not native to America. We know that they're not native to South America. They were brought, you know, from Spain. I mean, so they're either going to have to swim, get on a boat, or somebody's going to have to bring them. Now, there is some speculation that maybe like in the upper North American continent, am I saying this right? That there might have still been a land bridge up there at that point, so that there might have still been some access from one continent to the other one. But I understand. I thought about that too. They had to, you know, they had a long way to go. Except the turtles, they said, we'll just stay right here. We're good right here. Yes. Uh-huh. Oh, Genesis 10:25? For in his days the earth was divided. That's true. Very, very good. Yeah. So it began to divide at that time. Amen. Yeah, he could. Sure, he could. I mean, we're not doubting that. We're not doubting that at all. Yeah, yeah. He could have left the mosquitoes on Ararat, though, right?
Armadillos got left here too.
Armadillos. They're kind of cute.
No, they're not.
Anything else?
When they landed on the top of the mountain,
Mm-hmm.
how far were they from where they originally were? I mean, are they in the same part of the world, in the same part of the country, or?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question. No, they're not in exactly the same.
Because when they step out, they're in a whole new,
Yeah.
new world to them.
Yeah, she was asking, like, when they get out and they're in Ararat, you know, where did they begin at? And I'm going to say in somewhere modern day Iraq is where maybe they began, which means they're in the same, but they're not close. I mean, so yeah, they're far away. I'll have to look at that. That's interesting. Where were they?
Especially when the wind was blowing that strong wind, they could have gone on the other side of the world.
They probably did. Yeah, they probably did.
Did they end up back where they
Right.
started or flooded?
Right.
You mentioned when it would start raining
Yeah.
and they would get worried. Well, there's that rainbow God sent.
Well, that's true. That's true. They had that promise.
Let them know.
But you still got to be shell-shocked just a little bit. Yeah, but no, you're right. Yeah, they had that promise from God. Yeah. Anything else?